8 years in uniform had hardened Silas's hands, but nothing prepared him for the sight that froze his breath: a wrecked car bleeding smoke on a mountain road, and two little girls in pink dresses clutching his loyal German shepherd, Valor. Their trembling wrists bore a birthmark shaped like a bird's wing, the very mark his family carried, the very mark he thought had died with the woman he loved. In that instant, war was no longer behind him. It was in front of him, written on the skin of children who might be his own. Would he have the courage to face a truth buried for 8 long years? The late afternoon light stretched long, pale fingers across the ridges of the Cascade Mountains as Silas drove his battered Jeep along the winding forest road. The air smelled of pine resin and damp earth, a mixture so sharp it almost cleansed the exhaustion from his chest. After 8 years of service in the army, 8 years of desert winds, grit in his teeth, and nights punctuated by distant gunfire, this silence felt alien. He had left the base only 2 days earlier, his duffel tossed in the back like a piece of his past that refused to settle. His body still carried the stiffness of discipline, but his soul craved rest. Beside him, stretched across the worn passenger seat, lay Valor, his German shepherd. At 5 years old, Valor was a magnificent creature, broad-shouldered, black and tan fur shining even in the weak light. His amber eyes carried a strange intelligence, the sort that unnerved strangers but gave Silas comfort. They had met during Silas's 3rd year of service, when the army had introduced canine units. Valor had been restless then, too sharp, too fierce for easy handlers. But Silas, patient and weary from battles of his own, had earned the dog's trust. Since then, they had been inseparable. Valor had once saved Silas from a collapsing wall during a raid. The scar along Silas's forearm was both his reminder and his proof of their bond. Now, with no battlefield left, Valor was not just his partner, he was his anchor to sanity. The forest outside was vast, an ocean of old-growth evergreens that loomed high and blotted out most of the sky. The hum of tires over gravel was the only sound, steady and hypnotic, almost lulling him into a trance. He adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, the leather worn smooth from years of use. In the glove box was a medal folded inside an old handkerchief. In his duffel, crumpled clothes and a single keepsake, a letter. The letter had been written 8 years earlier to Lana Marlowe, the woman who had once filled his world with warmth. Her laugh had been like glass chimes in the wind, fragile but unforgettable. She had been the only person to see through his guarded nature before the army hardened him further. When she told him about her illness, he had been helpless, swallowed by deployments and orders he could not refuse. He had written the letter in a desert outpost under a flickering lantern, his handwriting uneven, pressed down hard as if he could crush his own guilt into the page. He never sent it. Somehow it had followed him across continents, surviving sand, rain, and endless relocations. He carried it now not as hope but as penance, a reminder of words left unsaid. As the Jeep turned around a sharp bend, the forest deepened, shadows pooling beneath the trees like ink. Silas exhaled slowly. The road was slick from a recent drizzle, patches of damp earth glittering faintly. He reached down absently, brushing Valor's fur. The dog's ears twitched. Something in the air shifted, an unease that Valor sensed before Silas could name it. Then it happened. A blur of gray shot across the road. Too fast, too close. Instinct, honed by years of combat, made Silas jerk the wheel hard right. The Jeep skidded, gravel spraying, tires screaming. For one terrible heartbeat, he saw nothing but forest spinning outside the windshield. The vehicle tipped, slammed against the embankment, and rolled halfway down the slope before crashing into a thicket of firs. Silas's head struck the window. The world blurred into fragments of sound-shattering glass, the groan of metal, the low growl of Valor thrown forward against the seatbelt harness, then silence thick and heavy. When he came to, the acrid scent of leaking gasoline stung his nose. His chest was pinned against the steering wheel, his left leg trapped under twisted metal. Pain radiated up his spine, hot and merciless. He tried shifting, but agony lanced through his body, forcing a gasp from his throat. The windshield was fractured into a spider's web of cracks. The outside world split into jagged shards. Valor whined beside him, shaking off the shock. The dog pressed against the broken console, nudging Silas's shoulder with his nose. His eyes were wide, urgent, as if demanding that Silas not give in. Silas lifted a trembling hand, brushing Valor's fur. "Easy, boy. We've been through worse," he rasped, though the words tasted like lies. Minutes dragged into something shapeless. Silas's vision wavered, thoughts swimming. He almost surrendered to the dark pool when he heard it light footsteps crunching over the slope, hesitant but determined. A voice, small and breathless. "Mister, are you okay?" Through the cracked glass, two figures appeared. Twin girls, no older than 8, stood side by side. Their dresses were pink, faded at the hems, but clean, as if someone had tried to preserve at least a trace of innocence. Their faces were smudged with dirt, their hair chestnut brown, tangled from running through underbrush. One girl's hazel eyes widened with fear as she pressed her hand against the window, while the other clutched Valor's neck, burying her face in the dog's thick fur for courage. Silas tried to speak, but only a broken whisper escaped. The first twin tugged at the door handle, straining with all her might. When it didn't budge, she clenched her jaw, tears springing to her eyes. "Don't move, I'll get help," she said, her voice trembling but fierce. She darted off into the trees with surprising speed. The second girl lingered, her small hands still gripping Valor's fur. She glanced at Silas, frightened, but unwilling to leave. Valor pressed against her gently, his protective instinct flaring. Silas, even in his haze, felt something strange coil in his chest. The way the girl leaned on his dog was not just desperation, it was trust, pure and unspoken. Then he saw it. As the fading light filtered through the broken window, it caught the girl's wrist. There, clear against her pale skin, was a faint purplish mark in the shape of a bird's wing. His breath hitched. That mark, the same one his mother had, the same one his sister bore, the same one he had always thought of as a peculiar family crest. His heart pounded, louder than the pain, louder than reason. 2 girls, 8 years old, born during the exact span of his service. His eyes widened in disbelief. The girl pulled back slightly, hugging Valor tighter, as if sensing his fear. "Please, don't close your eyes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Then she too slipped into the forest, chasing after her sister. Alone again, Silas slumped against the seat. He looked down at his lap, at the duffel that had slid open in the crash. The corner of the old envelope jutted out, yellowed and fragile. He reached for it, fingers brushing the name scrawled at the top. Lana Marlowe. The pain in his body dimmed beneath a greater ache rising in his chest. He whispered her name, a sound broken and hoarse, then let his head rest back against the seat. Somewhere in the forest, Valor barked sharply, as if to anchor him to life. And just before the dark claimed him again, Silas realized the cruel symmetry. He had been gone for 8 years, and somewhere in the silence of those same years, 2 daughters, his daughters, had grown up without him. He surfaced from darkness to the pulse of rain on tin and the sting of antiseptic in his throat. A fan clicked in a slow, tired circle overhead, slicing the light into quiet pieces that drifted across the whitewashed walls. Silas lay on a narrow cot, bandaged at the ribs and thigh, with the ache of metal still ghosting his bones. Valor lay on a wool mat at the foot of the cot. Head up, ears pricked, his whole body set like a compass needle toward the door. The clinic was the kind that existed more from stubbornness than funding. 2 rooms, a row of dented cabinets, and a handwritten sign that read, "Please knock some things, here still heal." A woman entered carrying a metal tray, and the air shifted with her presence. Nurse Nora Bell, 38, small and sturdy, had ash blonde hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun, and eyes the gray-blue of Oregon rain. The tiny lines at their corners spoke of long nights and too many promises to too many families. She had grown up in logging country, lost a brother to a mill accident at 16, and had learned the hard math of caretaking. Show up, do right, forgive the ones who don't. "You're awake," she said, voice firm but gentle. "Lucky man, unlucky guardian angel." She nodded toward Valor. "Dog wouldn't leave your side. Tried to hurt us like we were sheep when we moved you off that stretcher." Silas swallowed, the edges of memory returning in splinters. Yarn glass, fir needles, pink fabric, Small hands? The girls, he rasped. Two of them, in pink dresses. Nora's brow knit. A couple of locals brought you in retired logger named Hank Lowell and his grandson. Said a child ran to the road and waved them down. By the time they got you loose, she'd vanished back into the trees. She set the tray down and checked his pupils with a penlight. No one's claimed them. Nobody's come asking. Valor rose, padded to the door, and let out a low, steady huff, as if reminding the room that absence is also evidence. Silas swung his legs over the cot, pain knifing and then receding to a throb. Nora put a hand to his shoulder but didn't press. She could read the particular urgency of a man who had measured his life in missions and after-action reports, who now suspected the mission was his own blood. You shouldn't be walking, she warned, but I won't stop you. I've learned the difference between healing and hiding. She handed him a folded map, dog-eared at the corners. The truck dropped you near Larchwood Ridge. Only houses out that way are scattered. If there are twins in pink dresses, someone nearby buys a lot of stain remover. The attempt at humor landed softly. A small light in a dark hall. She opened the door. Valor pressed against Silas's knee, a steadying weight as they stepped into the wet afternoon. Outside the clinic, the town sat like a stubborn knot at the edge of the Forest 2 gas pumps. A coffee kiosk that had once been a horse trailer, a feed store with a carved wooden elk over the door. Across the road, Hank Lowell, a big-shouldered man in his 70s with a beard like winter moss and the wide-knuckled hands of a life spent lifting the unliftable, leaned against a battered Ford. His grandson Tyler, 14, freckled and lanky with a jaw set in the permanent half-defiance of boyhood, stood beside him, eyes bright with the adrenaline of having done something that mattered. Hank tipped his cap. You owe that little one your life, he said without ceremony. She moved like she'd been chased her whole life and had finally decided to chase back. Tyler, trying to ground his own shaking, added, She grabbed my sleeve like it was a handle and said, Please, sir, fast. Not mister. Sir. Like she'd been practicing asking adults for big favors. Hank glanced toward the ridgeline. Only family up there since the paper mill closed is the Marlowe place. House with a rusted roof that sings when the rain hits it. Folks say the older sister keeps to herself. He lowered his voice without meaning to. Keeps to herself can mean too many things. The name struck bone. Silas thanked them, promised coffee he could not afford yet, and slid into the Jeep. Valor leapt in after, a shadow of muscle and intent. The road climbed, the forest shouldering closer, draped in mist that softened the shape of everything, but didn't change the truth of it. When the gravel thinned to ruts, the house appeared, an old timber frame with a tin roof freckled brown with rust, a sagging porch, and a yard that had given up pretending to be a lawn. A wind-twisted maple leaned toward the eaves as if listening for secrets. On the porch rail sat a ceramic bird bath turned to an ashtray, and on the sill of the left window stood a small, simple frame. From the yard through rain-silvered glass, Silas could just make out the photograph. Lana, hair loose over one shoulder, smiling with that kindness that made other people confess things. The breath left him and returned as something heavier. He climbed the steps, knocked. Valor sat but bristled, gaze fixed past the door into deeper rooms. The woman who opened answered to the house. Candace Marlowe looked mid-30s with chestnut hair scraped back and a face that would have been pretty if it had not been trained for withholding. Her eyes were the careful green of someone who has priced everything in a room before speaking. She wore a gray cardigan pilled at the elbows and jeans that had carried more winter than summer. The guarded lines around her mouth suggested long arguments with bills and longer ones with herself. She smelled faintly of lavender cleaner and cigarette smoke. We're not buying, she said, already closing the door a fraction. Silas steadied his voice. Ma'am, I was in a wreck down by the ravine. 2 little girls helped save me. Pink dresses. I came to say thank you to them, or to whoever's looking after them. A shadow crossed her face, quick and mean as a crow cutting the sky. There are no girls here, she said. Just me. Valor rose, took 2 steps forward, and planted a paw on the threshold. His growl was not loud, but it had weight. He was looking past Candace into the dim hallway, where a closed door sat at the end, paint chipped to bare wood, where hands had worried it over years. Silas stood his ground, posture neutral, palms visible, the old training of de-escalation surfacing. "I don't want trouble," he said. "I want gratitude to land where it belongs." Candace's lip twitched, almost a smile, almost a snarl. "Funny how men with wrecked cars think they own the road," she said. "There are children in this world who know when to keep quiet. You should try it." She began to close the door. "May I ask one thing?" Silas said the words out before he could stop them. He nodded toward the windowsill. "The photograph. The woman in it, her name is Lana, isn't it?" For a heartbeat, the room behind her seemed to tilt. Candace didn't turn to look. "Old picture," she said, voice flattening the way people do when they step onto a lie. "Belonged to the previous owner." "And the previous owner was your sister," Silas said, soft as rain. Silence grew its roots between them. Valor bumped Silas's thigh, then moved swift, decisive past Candace's leg, when she startled and turned her shoulder to block him. In 2 strides, he was at the end of the short hall, nose pressed to the bottom of the closed door. He sniffed, stiffened, and pawed once, twice, with a sharp bark that cracked the stillness like a drop plate. From behind the door came a hush, then the tiny scrape of something dragged across wood a chair leg or the edge of a shoe. Candace recovered fast. "Get your animal out of my house," she hissed, grabbing for Valor's collar. She never got hold of it. Valor backed out on command, one word from Silas, and returned to sit at his side, but he never stopped staring at the door. "If there are girls in there," Silas said, keeping his voice a controlled hum, "I brought something for them." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper bag from the town kiosk. 2 brioche rolls dusted with sugar, bright as small suns against the gray day. "A thank you." Simple Candace's gaze flicked from the bag to the hall and back. The calculation in her eyes was almost audible. She cracked the door wider and accepted the bag with fingertips that did not tremble. "You've said your piece," she said. "We're done." The door shut. The bolt slid, clean and final. Silas stood on the porch with the rain ticking on the roof like a pocket watch measuring out a life. He did not pound or shout. Instead, he took a step to the window, shielding the glass with his palm against the glare. The little frame on the sill stared back. It wasn't a studio portrait, but something intimate, a candid taken on a day ordinary enough to be sacred. Lana in a cotton dress, a cardigan undone at the throat, one hand lifted mid-gesture, laughing at someone just outside the frame. That old wonder rose in him and then, with it, a hardening clarity. This was Lana's house once, and nothing the world said or didn't say would make that untrue. He descended the steps, mud sucking at his boots. Valor paced 3 steps ahead, then turned, then paced again, restless as a question mark that refused to flatten into a period. At the edge of the yard, under the leaning maple, Silas noticed the smallest scatter of pink thread caught in the bark, shimmering damp. He tucked a strand into his pocket like a relic and followed the fence line until it met the trees. There, pressed in the soft dirt, were footprints, 2 sets, small and close together, turned heel in as children do when they whisper to one another as they walk. He knelt, letting the rain cut clean lines on his face. Behind him, a pickup creaked past on the road and was gone. Somewhere up the ridge, a tin roof sang under the weather. "All right," he said to Valor, which was another way of saying it to himself. "We don't push the door today." He looked back at the house once more. In the window beyond the photograph, a shadow shifted, the brief outline of a small head in a pale hand. Then the curtain fell back into place. On the drive back toward town, the trees crowded in and then loosened, the world breathing with him. Valor settled on the seat, eyes never leaving the line where road met rain. Silas followed the map Nora had given him to a turnout above a narrow creek. He cut the engine and listened to the water talk to rock. He felt the letter in his pocket like a living thing. 8 years of duty, 8 years of silence, 1 afternoon of pink dresses and a dog who knew where the truth lived. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine Lana's voice not as echo, but as instruction. When he opened them, the decision had already been made. He would return, not as a battering ram, but as a witness who would not look away. He started the engine, headed for town, in the first phone he could trust. The storm had followed them into the night as Silas's old pickup rattled down the narrow road leading from the house. The windshield wipers swiped furiously against sheets of rain, though they barely cleared enough to see. Silas gripped the wheel tight, his knuckles pale, while Ellie and Clara sat huddled in the passenger seat, wrapped in his army jacket. Valor was in the back, his massive frame sprawled across the bench, ears flicking at every thunderclap. Yet his presence was a wall of calm between the girls and the chaos outside. They drove into the city, past quiet neighborhoods and shuttered shops, until the glow of the military hospital in Asheville rose ahead. Its floodlights cut through the storm, illuminating the clean lines of brick walls and tall windows. The facility carried the faint air of order and precision, a place where rules were followed and truth was documented. Silas knew it was the one place he could trust. Inside, the sterile corridors smelled faintly of disinfectant and antiseptic. A nurse at the desk looked up sharply as Silas entered, dripping wet, carrying both twins in his arms. She was a young woman, barely 30, with her dark hair pinned tightly under a cap. Her eyes widened at the sight of the girls, their legs streaked with sores, their cheeks flushed with fever. Without hesitation, she pressed a button and summoned a doctor. Moments later, Dr. Helen Carter arrived. She was in her mid-40s, a woman with sharp blue eyes, her sandy hair pulled into a practical bun. She wore her authority like a uniform, crisp white coat swaying as she walked with measured steps. Helen had spent 20 years in military service as a physician before transferring to Asheville to head the pediatric ward. She had learned to read people as much as symptoms, a skill honed by treating children in war zones where lies and desperation often mask the truth. "What happened here?" she asked, her voice even but carrying a weight that silenced the room. "My daughters," Silas replied simply. His voice cracked despite his effort to remain steady. He lowered Ellie and Clara gently onto the bed. Valor pressed close, resting his chin carefully on the mattress near Clara's hand. The girl's fingers curled into his fur as if he were her anchor. Helen knelt beside them, her hands moving with both efficiency and tenderness. She examined the angry sores, pressed gently against their thin wrists, checked their eyes and mouths. "Severe scabies," she said after a few minutes, her tone clipped with professional certainty. "Both children are malnourished. Their dehydration is concerning. And these sores, this has been going on for months." She straightened, her gaze sharp as a blade when it turned back to Silas. "This is long-term neglect." Silas's chest constricted. He lowered his eyes, his jaw tightening. He had fought battles in foreign deserts, but none had left him feeling so powerless. Helen reached for a clipboard. "By law, Sergeant Morgan, I am required to file a report with Child Protective Services. They'll send a caseworker within 24 hours. We'll admit the girls for treatment tonight." Silas nodded. "Do it," he said firmly, the decision leaving no room for doubt. He knew this was no longer only his battle, it was a matter of justice. As the twins were treated, ointment applied, IVs placed, Valor never moved from their side. He lay stretched out on the floor, his head pressed against the mattress, eyes watching every nurse who entered as though silently judging their intentions. When the girls whimpered in discomfort, he nosed their hands steady and warm, his presence a wordless lullaby that calmed their fears. Later, when the room grew quiet and the twins finally fell asleep, Silas sat heavily in the chair beside them. His eyes lingered on their small faces, so fragile, so pale. He thought of Sarah, his late wife, the girlhood sweetheart who had married him before his first deployment. She had been slender, with dark hair that tumbled past her shoulders and a smile that always carried strength even in illness. Sarah had died when Ellie and Clara were just 3, leaving him with a promise that he would raise them with love. He had believed foolishly that marrying Candace 2 years later would give them a mother's care. Instead, he had delivered them into cruelty. The guilt gnawed at him, a weight heavier than any combat gear. He rubbed his palms against his face, staring at the white hospital walls that felt too clean compared to the filth he had pulled his daughters from. He whispered to himself, "I failed them. I failed Sarah." His phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen. Candace. Against his better judgment, he answered. Her voice spilled through the receiver, dripping with rehearsed sorrow. "Silas, where are you? You've scared the girls, tearing them away like that. People saw you. You're unstable. After deployments like yours with PTSD, you can't be trusted with children. I was protecting them." Silas's hand gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles whitened. "You locked them in a shed," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're imagining things," Candace replied quickly. "You're not well. Everyone knows soldiers like you come back with problems. I've spoken with people. They agree." Silas ended the call without another word, his chest burning with rage. Valor lifted his head at the tension in his master's body, then laid it gently back down, a silent reminder to stay grounded. He knew then that Candace would not stop. She would twist reality, turn whispers into accusations. He could no longer rely on confrontation alone. He needed to fight her where she least expected. In the courts with proof, with law. The next morning, as dawn pushed pale light through the blinds, Marcus Hale arrived at the hospital. Marcus was a family attorney in his early 50s, tall with a lean frame, his hair streaked silver at the temples. His suit was modest but perfectly pressed, his wire-rimmed glasses giving him a thoughtful air. He had earned a reputation in Asheville for his steady voice in chaotic cases, the kind of lawyer who didn't rattle easily. "Silas," Marcus greeted quietly, shaking his hand firmly. "Helen called me. I've seen too many cases like this, but rarely with a father ready to fight as you are. That notebook you showed me, it's powerful. Keep it safe. And the neighbor, Mrs. Whitaker? She's willing to testify, yes?" Silas nodded, his throat tight. "She filmed what happened." Marcus's mouth set into a line. "Then we have a beginning. But prepare yourself. Candace will not fold. She'll push back, and she'll try to paint you as unfit. Your military record, your deployments, she'll twist them into weapons." Silas leaned back in his chair, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "She already has. She's saying I've got PTSD, that I'm dangerous." Marcus didn't flinch. "Then we answer with truth. Witnesses, medical records, the girl's own testimony. We fight with proof, not words. You've been a soldier your whole life. This battle is different, but the strategy is the same. Discipline, patience, and evidence." Silas glanced at Valor, who lifted his head as though to second the lawyer's words. The German shepherd's amber eyes reflected the same loyalty that had carried them both through deserts and danger. Now, Valor would stand as silent proof of a bond no lie could sever. That night, as the girls slept peacefully for the first time in months, Silas sat awake, his gaze drifting between the small forms on the bed and the storm beyond the window. The rain had stopped, but the war was only beginning. And this time, the battlefield was not sand and smoke. It was the walls of a courtroom, the whispers of neighbors, the fragile trust of his daughters. Silas clenched his jaw, his resolve sharpening into iron. He would not fail them again. The days that followed the hospital admission blurred into a cycle of waiting rooms, whispered reassurances, and the constant shuffle of medical staff tending to Ellie and Clara. Though their sores were slowly healing, the larger wounds, the ones carved into their trust, lingered in every hesitant glance and timid flinch. Silas barely left their side, except to meet with Dr. Helen Carter and Marcus Hale, who guided him step by step through what would inevitably come, the legal fight for custody. On the third morning, 2 women from Child Protective Services arrived at the hospital. One was in her late 30s, Ms. Evelyn Ramirez, with olive skin, dark eyes behind rimmed glasses, and a tone that was measured but firm. She had a reputation in Buncombe County for her diligence and refusal to let cases be swept under the rug. Her partner, a younger woman named Casey Monroe, barely 25, wore her blonde hair in a short bob and carried a notepad everywhere she went. Fresh out of graduate school, Casey still had the energy of someone who believed every case could be turned into a rescue story. They sat across from Silas in a small conference room. Evelyn adjusted her glasses, her gaze steady. "Sergeant Morgan, we've reviewed Dr. Carter's medical report. Severe neglect, prolonged malnutrition, untreated scabies. The evidence is strong, but we'll need corroborating testimony and proof that this was systemic, not a misunderstanding." Silas placed the notebook Valor had unearthed onto the table. Its frayed cover and childlike scribbles spoke louder than any words he could have formed. Next to it, he laid down the phone of Mrs. Whitaker, already cued to the video she had filmed. Ellie and Clara shoved onto the porch, Candace's voice sharp with disdain, the door slamming. Evelyn's brows knitted, and Casey covered her mouth as the clip ended. "This," Evelyn said quietly, "is more than enough to open a case for custody reassignment." She folded her hands. "But Candace will fight. We've already been contacted by her attorney. She's claiming you're unstable due to combat trauma. They'll bring up PTSD, rage, violence." Silas exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. "I've spent my life serving this country. They'll twist that into a weapon against me?" Evelyn nodded, her expression not unkind but blunt. "They will." That afternoon, Marcus Hale met Silas in the hospital cafeteria. The lawyer's silver hair glinted under the harsh fluorescent lights, his lean frame pressed into a gray suit that never seemed to wrinkle. "Candace hired Graves," Marcus said, his voice low. "Kenneth Graves. He's ruthless, mid-50s, a courtroom predator, known for painting victims as liars and fathers as monsters. His specialty is exploiting fear, especially in custody battles." Silas gritted his teeth. "Let him try. I have the truth." Marcus leaned in, lowering his voice further. "Truth doesn't always win on its own. That's why we need people who know you. Character witnesses. I've already contacted someone, Sergeant Miller." The name stirred something warm inside Silas. Miller had been his closest comrade, a man built like an oak tree with a square jaw, African-American, mid-40s, who had shared foxholes, rations, and nights of fire with him. Loyal, straightforward, a soldier's soldier. "If Miller speaks for me, the court will have no choice but to listen." The day of the hearing arrived with a bitter chill in the air. The courthouse in downtown Asheville was an old red brick building, its clock tower looming against a pale winter sky. Inside, the family courtroom was small but tense, the benches filled with curious faces, murmurs spreading like static before a storm. Candace entered first, her hair styled flawlessly, her floral dress modest, her face pale but painted with an expression of fragile sorrow. Beside her stood Graves, tall and gaunt, his narrow eyes sweeping the room like a hawk searching for prey. He placed a hand on her shoulder, whispering something that made her nod tearfully before dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Silas arrived moments later, Valor walking calmly at his heel. Though technically not allowed in courtrooms, Marcus had secured special permission for the dog to remain as a comfort animal for the children's testimony. Dressed in a plain navy suit, Silas carried himself with the upright posture of a soldier, though his eyes betrayed the exhaustion of sleepless nights. He took his seat beside Marcus, who organized papers with precise, deliberate motions, radiating calm. The judge, Honorable Margaret Hollis, entered the room, a woman in her 60s with sharp cheekbones and a voice that brooked no nonsense. She had presided over hundreds of custody battles and had grown skilled at separating truth from theatrics. She adjusted her robe, looked over the room and said, "Proceed." Graves struck first. He painted Silas as an unstable veteran, scarred by war, prone to anger. He called Candace a devoted mother, who had only acted out of fear for her children's safety. To bolster his case, he brought in Candace's brother, Henry, a stocky man with a red face, who testified shakily that Silas once snapped at a barbecue, raising his voice over something trivial. Graves used the moment to thunder about violent tendencies lying beneath the surface. Marcus rose calmly for the defense. "Your Honor, conjecture and rumor are not facts. Let us turn to evidence." He called Mrs. Whitaker to the stand. The elderly neighbor, her hair white under a neat hat, spoke with surprising firmness. She described the night she saw Ellie and Clara shoved from the house, her words steady, her voice carrying the weight of decades of community respect. She handed over the video, which was played for the courtroom. Silence followed as the images flickered. Candace's hand pushing the door, the twins stumbling, Valor barking, their small bodies shivering on the porch. Next came Sergeant Miller. He strode to the stand in full dress uniform, medals gleaming across his chest. His deep voice resonated as he spoke of Silas's character, his discipline, his calm under fire, his loyalty to his men. I've seen him hold dying comrades in his arms and still finish the mission with clarity. If anyone claims this man is unstable, they have never seen true stability under chaos. The courtroom shifted, eyes turning toward Silas with newfound respect. Finally, Marcus called Ellie and Clara. The twins walked hesitantly to the front, their pink dresses pressed freshly, though their small hands trembled as they clutched each other. Valor padded beside them, taking his place at their feet. Marcus knelt to meet their eyes, his voice gentle. Ellie, Clara, can you tell the court where you lived at home? Clara's lips quivered. In the shed, she whispered. Her sister nodded quickly, tears sliding down her cheeks. It was dark. It smelled bad. At night, we were scared. The judge leaned forward. And what do you want now, children? Ellie looked up, eyes wet but burning with determination. We just want to live with Daddy. And Valor. Please. The moment hung in the air like a prayer. Valor, sensing the weight of it, rested his head on Clara's knee, his amber eyes gazing solemnly at the judge. It was not rehearsed, not commanded. It was instinct, loyalty distilled into one silent gesture. The courtroom fell utterly silent, every whisper drowned by the image of two trembling girls shielded by their father's dog. Judge Hollis cleared her throat, her voice thick. I've heard enough. This court will recess for deliberation. When she returned, her ruling was swift. Custody is granted to Sergeant Silas Morgan. Candace Whitfield is found unfit for guardianship and is ordered to undergo parental counseling. The safety of Ellie and Clara lies with their father. The gavel fell, a single sound that cracked like thunder. Candace gasped, covering her face with trembling hands while Graves scowled, already planning an appeal. Silas closed his eyes briefly, relief flooding him like a tide. When he opened them, his daughters were running into his arms, Valor pressing close against all three of them as if to shield the reunion from any further harm. The gavel's echo still rang in Silas's memory long after the courtroom had emptied. But by the time spring unfolded across the Blue Ridge Mountains, that sound was replaced by gentler ones. The creak of a swing, the laughter of children, the low bark of a watchful dog. Silas had won custody, not with triumph in his heart, but with the heavy gratitude of a man who knew how easily it could have gone the other way. Justice had been served, but true healing had only begun. He rented a small house just outside Asheville, a simple structure with white siding and a wooden porch, its roof low and welcoming. What sold him wasn't the paint or the porch, but the little yard fenced in white pickets, and in its center, a young apple tree just beginning to bud. Its thin branches reached skyward with the fragile hope of new beginnings. Silas thought of Ellie and Clara as he signed the lease. They, like this tree, had been planted in hard soil but still stretched toward light. The first days in the new house were filled with the kind of chores Silas didn't mind. Hammering nails into loose boards, mending the latch-on gate, painting the fence until the white shone against the green. Ellie and Clara followed him everywhere, still afraid of being left, their little hands stained with streaks of paint as they helped. Valor paced the perimeter of the yard tirelessly, inspecting each gap in the fence with the seriousness of a soldier on patrol. When he found a loose slat, he barked once until Silas came to fix it. On the third day, Silas brought home lumber and rope. Today, he said, his voice lighter than it had been in months, we build something just for you. He showed the twins how to sand the planks, their laughter rising as sawdust clung to their hair. Together they fastened a wooden seat, and Silas tied it to the sturdiest branch of the apple tree. When the swing was ready, Clara climbed on first, her legs pumping awkwardly until Silas gave a gentle push. Her shriek of delight rang like bells, drawing Ellie to line up for her turn. Valor circled the tree, barking as though celebrating their joy, leaping each time the swing swooped low. That evening, as the sun spilled gold across the yard, Silas sat on the porch steps, sweat dampening his shirt, watching his daughters laugh as though they had been waiting years for permission. His chest swelled with something he had almost forgotten. Peace. A week later, a letter arrived. The handwriting on the envelope was shaky, each letter wavering. Inside was a folded sheet and a crayon drawing. The letter was from Selena Whitfield, Evan's grandmother, a woman in her late 60s who had spent most of her life in Tennessee, but often came to Asheville to see her daughter and grandson. She had gray hair pulled back in a bun, a kind face lined with worry, and a heart burdened by guilt. Silas, the letter began, I know no apology will ever mend what has been done, but I must try. I was blind to Candace's cruelty. I believed her stories and I did nothing when I should have spoken. Evan, he has changed since the trial. He speaks less, and when he does, it is often about the twins. He asked me to send this drawing to them. Please, if you find it in your heart, let them know he remembers. Tucked in the envelope was a crayon sketch of 3 children beneath a crooked tree. Evan's handwriting scrawled across the bottom, for Ellie and Clara. Silas stared at it for a long time, torn between anger at Candace and pity for the boy who had been manipulated into silence. He showed the drawing to his daughters gently. Clara smiled faintly, whispering, Maybe Evan isn't bad. Maybe he was just scared. Silas stroked her hair, knowing she was right. Fear had poisoned them all, but perhaps time could cleanse. Later that month, Silas's old comrade, Sergeant Miller, arrived unannounced. His broad frame filled the doorway, a basket of bright red apples in his arms. Found these at a farmer's market down the road, Miller said, grinning beneath his neatly trimmed beard. His presence was like an anchor, solid, familiar, grounding. The 2 men clasped hands, their greeting firm but warm, then settled onto the porch as the twins dashed into the yard to show off their new swing. They cracked open bottles of beer Miller had brought along. For a while they spoke of nothing, just watched Ellie and Clara soaring beneath the apple blossoms, Valor racing circles around them, barking each time the swing swooped too far. Clara's laughter spilled over the fence, drawing a neighbor or two to glance from their porches, smiling at the sight of the little family rebuilding itself. Miller leaned back against the railing, his eyes soft. You fought in deserts, jungles, and cities half a world away, he said slowly. But this, he gestured toward the yard, toward the children and the dog. This is the real battlefield, brother, and I think you're winning. Silas's throat tightened. He tipped his beer bottle in a small salute, his voice rough but steady. This is the only battle that matters. The sun dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of rose and gold. Ellie jumped from the swing, her bare feet slapping the grass, and ran to Valor, wrapping her arms around his neck. Clara soon joined, both girls collapsing in laughter as the dog toppled them gently, licking their cheeks with sloppy affection. The sight made Silas smile in a way he hadn't in years. He thought of Sarah, of her promise that love would be their strength. For the first time since her passing, he felt he was keeping that promise. When the evening shadows grew long, Miller rose to leave. He clasped Silas's shoulder with the firm grip of a comrade who had seen him through fire. Keep building this, Silas. Don't let anyone tear it down again. After Miller's truck pulled away, the house grew quiet except for the chirp of crickets. Silas carried the twins inside, tucking them beneath clean sheets. Valor curled at the foot of their bed, ears twitching, a silent sentinel. On the porch later, Silas leaned back in his chair, gazing at the apple tree swaying in the night breeze. He whispered to himself, not in triumph, but in reverence. This is the true fight, and this time, I've won. In the end, Silas did not find victory on a battlefield far away, but beneath the branches of an apple tree, in the laughter of his daughters and the loyalty of a dog who never left their side. This story reminds us that a true home is not built with walls or fences, but with love, protection, and the courage to stand for those who cannot stand for themselves. Have you ever witnessed how a father's love or a loyal dog's devotion can change everything? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and follow our channel for more stories of faith, healing, and the quiet strength of family.